Hello mate and welcome back. In this video we're going to talk about organizing your projects. Before I get started, a huge thank you to everybody for subscribing and hitting that notification icon. That really helps me out. And an even bigger thank you to my members and patrons. Your names will be running across the screen at the end of the video. So this is a topic that we have covered in the previous RenPy series, but it does get requested quite a bit. So let's jump in and talk about this then. The first thing we need to understand is that the game folder here on the left, this is your root directory for your game. This is where RenPy considers to be 00 if you like. It's going to check for your project files within this folder. Now, unlike the images folder, which is here, where RenPy checks for your images, RenPy checks the entirety of the game folder and all of its subfolders for any files called something.rpy. So it takes all of your RPY files and then it smashes them together into one big file. So how does RenPy know what order to execute the code in? Well, there are some clues that we put in our code. For example, when we use the init command, for example, here in the GUI file, and also if we were to go to our classes.rpy file, the very first command is init python, which is us telling the game, these are the bits of code that we want you to run at the start. But obviously we can put this in different files. So we can have lots of different inits in our game, spread out all over the place. And if you look at the GUI RPY file, what you can see here is that there's a command called init offset equals, and then a number. Now, let's assume that init offset 0 is our run. That's when our game actually starts. So anything that we do before that in the minus numbers is going to happen before the game runs. And the lower this number is, so -2 will occur after -3, -3 will occur after -4, and so on, in ad infinitum basically. If you look at other game developers' code, sometimes they'll have like init offset -100. Little bit excessive. Shows a lack of planning really, but it certainly does what it's meant to do, and it gets the code in that particular file to occur before everything else. And that's how we do that. Now what you can see here is what I've done in our, this time it's personal code, is I've actually created lots of subfolders. So I've got a folder for all of my screens, I've got a folder for my interactions, I've got the main script file outside the core file, but within the scripts folder. And realistically, I can teach you how to, or I can tell you how I do it, but this may not necessarily be a way that makes any sense to you. So realistically, it's entirely up to you how you spread your files around. But I would strongly recommend keeping individual files for individual screens. It just makes navigating your code a lot easier than having them all in one big file, like the RenPy, for example, the RenPy screens file, which I've renamed as styles. If we were to look into that folder, that file there, when RenPy generates its code, it smashes all of its default screens into one file, which isn't the end of the world, but it does make finding those screens a little bit of a pain in the bum. So again, what I would suggest you do is, like we did at the start of the RenPy Let's Code 4 season, is take all of our screens and put them into their individual files. And it might mean that your screen file only has 5 lines of code in it, but it also means it's a great deal easier to locate that code if you want to make any changes. Now, realistically, what I should also be doing is taking the styles and putting all of those into their individual files as well. However, I'm a bit lazy for that, but I would strongly recommend that if you have the time and the energy to do it, because again, it does make changing things a little bit easier if you are going to customize your user interface, which the majority of the time people do. And yes, I know I just said do. So yeah, create your own files. Just remember that it has to be within the game folder, and inside the scripts folder, which I've actually created, is a ideal location to put them, because then it allows you to compartmentalize your code and keep everything nice and separate. And then when it comes to adding things, you can just add them in the correct folders. It takes almost no time in Atom, because you have the file tree here on the left, and you can add files and folders very easily simply by right clicking, and then you can see new file, new folder, and then just create them. And that just stops your game files getting a little bit, confusing and a little bit messy. I have seen some code that's been sent to me is very, very messy, and I always assume that it's because they're trying to just send me the minimum amount of code that they need, rather than sending me their entire game, which obviously I greatly appreciate, because there's nothing worse than trying to sift through someone's entire game to find a problem. Either way, so let me know what you think in the comments below. I hope you found that useful. I understand that this was a very short video, but it's just explaining the idea behind keeping your game organized so that you don't get lost in the mire when you're halfway through coding your game, especially if you have a break and then you come back to it. Trying to figure out where you are sometimes can be a bit of a challenge. Anyway, thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you next time. But until then, you take damn good care of yourselves. All right, bye-bye.